This is Find Your Flow, a show about navigating the complexities of life and business through the lens of curiosity. I'm your host, Angelique, and I bring together experts to deliver responsibly curated conversations and perspectives that aim to progress people and the planet. Let's dive into the world of human-centered design and how it's shaping every aspect, from the way we interact with technology to the spaces we live and work in. Our guest, and you might remember her from a previous episode, is a true expert in this field and will be sharing insights on how thoughtful and empathetic design can bring about positive changes that touch every single aspect of our life. So welcoming back Rebecca Weiss. She is a design thinking leader and coach, and one of my greatest inspirations, and somebody I am lucky to call my friend. So Rebecca, thanks for coming back on to share your insights on, I think a topic that many don't really know exists sometimes. These are big, huge roles that really do touch, how we walk into a store, what an operating room looks like, what products feel like. And I'm just excited to hear more about your background and your experience and what you're doing now. So care to share some of that with us?
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for having me. So I've been working in the field of human-centered design for a little over a decade. And when I first got interested in design, I was actually in high school. But most people, when they grow up and they hear about design, they don't hear about human-centered design or design thinking. You think design, it's, I got to pick graphic design, or I got to pick fashion design, or I've got to pick interior design. And that was the hardest thing for me because I was interested in a lot of different design fields. And then in my early 20s, I stumbled upon the term design thinking, first heard about it through a company called IDEO. I just started really devouring everything I could get my hands on after I heard the term. And I was like, this is it. This is what I want to pursue in my career. I decided to go back to school and get a master's in design management. And I've been practicing in the field of design thinking and service design ever since.
That's incredible. And so tell us a little bit more on a day-to-day basis. When do we engage with design thinking and some of those elements?
I would argue that we engage with design every day, right? It's everything from our mouse that we interact with when we work at our computer to the way that a space makes us feel, the way that a car is laid out to be intuitive and easy to use and help you not get in an accident when you're driving down the road and not get distracted by too many things, right? So design is behind a lot of what we experience day to day. With design thinking, it's about thinking like a designer and applying a human-centered lens to creating great experiences, great touch points, great brands. So it's all around us.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the other things that come up for me in that topic is, how does design thinking play a role in the psychology of why people make decisions in a certain area? Maybe even thinking about what that would look like from a purchasing standpoint.
Oh, yeah. So play out your question a little bit more. I want to think about it as I'm hearing you share more.
So one example that I've heard of in the marketing space, they have these things called the end caps, and the end caps on an aisle are placed there because that's an area that everyone's going to walk by, even more so than they may be walking down a specific aisle. So it kind of promotes a product in that space, more prevalently. I've also heard of design thinking in the aspect of like how you walk into an environment within a bank and how like the layout can flow in a certain way so that people are more engaged to go to one area over another, so that something, maybe a specific message is more viewed.
Totally. So your point is actually reminding me a little bit of a conversation I had on Friday with a good friend of mine who also works in the industry. And we were talking about her husband designs restaurants. And we were talking about how so many restaurants you walk in and there is no flow, there's no formula, there's no recipe that helps you seamlessly flow from one place to the next. And the opposite is true, right? So design thinking is about making an experience feel seamless, feel intuitive, make sense as you go one step to the next, to the next, to the next. So I experience it a lot in spaces day to day, where somebody who's really thoughtfully curated each step of your journey has thought about, is there friction walking from where my car is parked to the doorway? Is it easy for me to get through the doorway?
Mhm.
Let's say I've got kids, or I've got bags, or I've got a family member in a wheelchair. Is it easy for me to move through this space and move in and move towards the point of sale? What happens when I get to the point of sale? What do I notice and why? What are my first impressions? What am I drawn to? Is
Mhm.
it easy for me to pay? Is it difficult for me to pay? Design thinking is about removing the friction to make that experience easier. And
Mhm.
then, it doesn't stop at the point of sale. It continues as you go beyond that. So once you've got a product in hand, it's
Mhm.
like, let's keep with that restaurant example. Once you've got your food, it's going to be easy for you to find a table. It's going to be easy for you to navigate the space and find the other things you need, like your utensils, your spices, or whatever. So it's just about making that experience end-to-end cohesive,
Mhm.
simple, and easy to follow, and ultimately user-friendly.
Absolutely. And it reminds me a bit of, and I'm sure the concepts are very intertwined, but the idea of choice architecture that's
Mhm.
heavily fueled by psychology. One example of that, one of the best books that I've ever read from Nudge, they talk about choice architecture in the form of even like school lunch lines, where helping people make a better decision about what they eat can simply be made by placing it in specific areas. But that goes back to purchasing too. If you put candy bars or, specific products that you want to sell more of in these
Yep.
areas, people are thinking about buying them at specific points throughout that journey. So,
Mhm.
yeah, I see a lot of correlation between that. And you're right. It's amazing to think about how design impacts absolutely everything. I mean, I'm looking at my my background here and I'm like design, 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 design. Like everything
Yeah, totally.
us is a creation, which is a beautiful
Totally.
thing to think about, and the minds that go into how they think about those things.
Mhm.
To transition a little into, maybe some examples of inspirational design thinking examples that you've come across. Like, what are your top three that are just monumental game
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. Well, one that is the hot right now that, again, I talk to fellow practitioners in the field regularly. One that I've talked about in the last few weeks is actually Chick-fil-A's drive-through experience. And a lot of people don't know this, but Chick-fil-A actually hired a team of human-centered designers to make that a great experience. They went and they observed people going through the drive-through experience and took notes, and they prototyped ideas with real users. So that Chick-fil-A, when you go to the drive-through and you experience the ease, the convenience, oh my gosh, there's a really long line, but for some reason it doesn't take me that long and I don't feel stressed out. That was on purpose. That was human-centered design. That's one of my favorite examples right now. There's also a group that I'm kind of nerdy about, that I've been nerdy about for a number of years. They were one of the early groups of practitioners in service design called Service Design Berlin. And I'm always looking for what some of their alumni are doing out and about in the world, because
Mhm.
they really were some of the first practitioners of service design. And so I'm always like, what are people that came through that cohort up to? What businesses are they working in? Where are they getting inspired? What are the new things that they're creating in the world? And then I would say I'm also really curious at the moment around where there are applications of human-centered design in the corporate space in particular. You may recall a handful of years ago, an executive came in to IBM and had this charge where it was, let's bring in 100 human-centered designers into IBM and let's transform IBM with design thinking. And I love that idea of a bold vision around, let's drive transformation in a large organization through human-centered design. We've
Mhm.
seen some really cool brands like Expedia in the last few years latching on and saying, in order to compete with the Airbnbs of the world, we need to bring in a new way of working, a new way of thinking, et cetera. So I like seeing these legacy institutions that are saying, this is something that we can take and we can apply it and help make our organization better as well as relevant in the coming years. And so for me, that's a constant inspiration.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And one other point that I want to bring up about Chick-fil-A, which I could talk about Chick-fil-A all day. I absolutely love Chick-fil-A. And it is the smoothest process driving through those
It is.
drive-throughs. But one of the things I thought was interesting is during COVID, a local hospital actually asked them what they did and how they function because they wanted to mimic it for their COVID testing.
Oh,
And
totally.
just so interesting to think
Totally.
about. Yeah, look across industries,
Yeah.
like a
Yeah,
major
yeah, yeah.
hospital system asking a fast food establishment,
I
"Hey, how
love
can
that.
we make this more accessible to people?"
Totally.
Yeah, just fascinating how that works. And if anybody out there doesn't have Chick-fil-A or hasn't been to Chick-fil-A, please go to Chick-fil-A. It is literally it's so good. I just recently found that you can have those, like, large, like, tubs of the sauce too, which
Oh my
totally
gosh, really?
not
What?
sponsored, it is not sponsored by Chick-fil-A either.
Your story is reminding me, a good friend of mine has been working for a few years for HEB
Okay.
grocers. They're based out of Texas, and they have done, speaking of brands that have done an exceptional job during the pandemic to show up for customers, they
Mhm.
were one of those brands. In fact, they delivered so seamlessly on their brand promise, had great uh, availability of product throughout the pandemic, et cetera, that there was a government agency that actually went to them and said, we want to study what you guys have done because you've done such
Mm.
a good job.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot to that. Like, let's go find an inspiration that's somewhere else. And
Yes.
let's take that and apply it to our world. And, you know, if I'm a government agency, maybe the better place for me to look is in the private sector, not like, let me go try to find another government agency to emulate.
Mm.
So same with Chick-fil-A, right? I don't work in the fast casual restaurant space, but there are probably some great lessons I can apply to my work in the banking sector.
I wish we could scream that from the rooftops because I think sometimes we get so in the mode of looking at what our competitors do versus looking across the aisle of any other industry. Because
I
you're right,
agree.
there's so many problems that could be solved by looking and seeing what other industries are doing to solve them and putting the lens of your own problem or industry on.
I
That's
agree.
such a great point. Such a great point. What are some other areas of innovation within design
Mhm.
thinking? And specifically, maybe how is AI impacting design
Oh,
thinking and its practices?
yeah. I mean, so I would broaden the question a little bit to say about how AI is impacting design on the whole, right? So a number of designers have seen AI as a big threat. But I
Mm,
believe that AI is a huge opportunity for those who are experts in their craft in design. And my brother-in-law, he's a designer. He just graduated actually this past spring from NC State with a major focusing on experience design. And one of his points I think I would bring up here, he said, we need to become better question askers. Like
mhm,
our opportunity is to become better at asking questions. And so if we think like we have these tools at our disposal that can make basic tasks like mocking something up in Photoshop or rendering a concept so much faster, so much easier, writing a piece of copy so much faster, so much easier, then that allows us to think more about bigger and higher level problems than what we were thinking about before, and in some capacity outsource some of that work to machines. I
mm,
would say at the same time, and this is the other side of the coin, I think design thinking is a helpful methodology to address the applications of AI in the world, right? For us to think about where are the places where it's appropriate to bring AI in and where are the places where it might not be appropriate, right? Because a huge part of human-centered design is thinking about who's our user, what do they want, what do they need, and then we prototype things at small scale. We say, let's run a small experiment and see how this goes. So hypothetically with AI, you can actually run some small scale experiments that are lightweight, inexpensive, et cetera, and say, okay, this isn't actually going to work for this application because here's what went wrong, right?
mhm.
So rather than putting all of your eggs in that basket, you can try and find the places where AI is going to be the best at solving your problems and the places where perhaps AI is not going to be the best
Yeah.
at solving problems. So I would say like we don't have it solved yet. It's
Mhm,
definitely creating some new questions in the space for those who practice design and in particular design thinking.
mhm.
But then I would say at the end of the day, a lot of the skills of a design thinker are not the kind of skills you can outsource to machines, right? Empathy or creative problem solving or designing something completely novel, that's not what AI is great at. And so I think our industry is not in any danger of going extinct.
Yeah, that is true. I mean, well, you bring up a lot of great points. So my head's kind of thinking through this, but one being with having something like AI understand human emotion. The more information that we give it is one thing, but that's a really interesting concept to think about is how can machines become more empathetic or learn emotion? And I don't know that they can, but I don't know at the same time, I am so impressed and terrified in some instances of what is being done. And
what's
I want to go
possible.
back to emphasizing your point about asking the right questions. I'm a chat GPT user every single day. And I use it so much for information and for inspiration so that, if I'm stuck in a thought and I just want to get things going and it's always about how can I ask this question differently to get the answer that I'm hoping for or the one that I think will stick. And I think just in general, asking the right questions in conversations in machine learning, it's amazing what that can open up about communication. And it's a way of communicating. So the next question I have for you, it's going to interesting one. And I know that it's not necessarily about human-centered design.
Okay.
But one thing that I thought was interesting is a story a friend told me a few years back. She was telling me that they'd recently updated their kitchen and they had gotten new lighting fixtures. Well, after this had been done, her dog started acting really weird and didn't want to be inside the house, was really anxious out of nowhere, kept wanting to just sit outside and be as far away as possible.
Oh, really?
And she found that taking the dog to the vet was like, is there any changes going on in your house? Anything? She's like, well, yeah, we just updated the kitchen. He's like, what kind of light bulbs are you using?
Wow.
And essentially, they found that whatever frequency the light bulb was emitting was an issue to the dog's ears because dogs, and from what I understand, a lot of animal creatures have different frequencies that they think on.
Yeah.
The reason this came up to me recently is because we have one of those Google Fire alarms. Okay. The thing is absolutely brilliant. It's smart. We've got it connected on our alarm system or on our phones. And as alarm systems do, they need batteries. So it started beeping. And I noticed that about my dog, Zoe, is, oh my gosh, like in the middle of the night, she was just pacing and pacing and pacing on. And
Wow.
until we had that fixed and it was charged, she wanted to be outside. Like I couldn't get her into the house. So very long story, but I'm curious as to, I mean, this is Google. This is a huge company.
Yeah.
It has a lot of design thinking that goes into their products, hardware, software, etc. What are your thoughts on something like that? Thinking about animal-centered design.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. Well, it makes me think about design and unintended consequences. So one of the books that I read when I was in design school was more of a kind of a philosophical book that talks about new innovations that were introduced into indigenous cultures and had consequences that people didn't expect, because a lot of times new ideas or new innovations are introduced into an environment without spending a lot of time validating how that stimulus in that environment is going to affect everything around it, right? So my guess would be that perhaps those who designed both those light bulbs and those devices that were in your home didn't spend a lot of time doing testing with animals, right? They were hypothetically testing with humans and didn't think about the broader context, which included pets. It might have included babies. It might have included, animals out in nature. I don't know. And so to me, it is an example of unintended consequences. And it's something where a really good designer, and in the case of what you described, perhaps Amazon would go back to the drawing board and say, we need to keep innovating on this product, because in order to make it better and make it seamless in our users' environment, we're going to need to take into consideration the needs of their pets that are part of their experience in their home, right? I'll give you an example that builds off of that even for myself. I work for a company that I'm not allowed to use smart home devices while I'm working. I actually have to turn them off. So having the ability to like quickly modulate and have my devices all turn off across any space that could hear the conversations I'm having is really valuable. And that's an example of something that probably wasn't in the original use case in the design for it. That now that the product's been out there for a while, it's like, okay, well, that's probably something else that we need to start thinking about. What about these products when they end up in workplaces and environments where employees might be having sensitive conversations that we don't want these devices listening to, et cetera? So I think it's a great point. It makes me very curious as a designer to say, like, what are some opportunities to make the product better, to continue improving on the original design? But yeah, it's something that we run across a lot.
Yeah. Wow. That's just wild to know. I never thought about that. Well, it's kind of scary to have to think about that though. You know what I mean? Like
oh yeah,
my device is listening to me at all times.
Yeah.
And they're selling me things based on what I talk about. I'm like, we could mention anything right now. And, I really love big macaroni and cheese. So
totally.
For some reason, I started seeing ads about big macaroni. Yeah.
Totally. Well, like my husband and I have talked about wanting to have kids. You'd be not at all surprised if you walk into our bathroom where we have an Amazon device and suddenly see what kinds of ads are popping up, right? But that's part of like what you're buying into by buying into that particular product. You're saying, this device is going to listen to me, it's going to learn. And that means sometimes it's going to provide commentary back to me that's on the topic that I was talking about, but might not be the information that I really wanted to feed back to me on the screen.
That book Nudge, though, man, there's so much of this conversation that I love. And that book was it's such a rich deep dive into choice architecture, which really? I mean, there's so many parallels with it is design thinking. And, to those few points that you've made too, examples that they share that are similar. The other question that I have is if somebody wants to get a hold of you or have you come talk to their organization about human-centered design or just reach out with questions, where can people find you?
I would say go to my LinkedIn. Yeah, it's Rebecca Weiss. I also have a website, RebeccaHorton.net, but LinkedIn is probably the easiest place to reach me.
That'd be great. Well, I love it. This conversation I could talk about all day, but we're going to keep it to 25 minutes. I'm excited to continue the conversation with you. And I always learn so much when I talk with you. So thank you.
Agreed. You make me think about my own field. So thank you.
Love it. All right.